This is Rabbi Brovender Parsha Shiur of the WebYeshiva, and we're going to learn a little bit of Chumash of the Parsha together. Okay. The Parsha that we read tomorrow for Shabbat and Shul is Mטות-מסעי, which means the end of the book of Bamidbar. And so it is reasonable to reconsider something about the book. Is there something about the book that we can understand, having learned it intensively, Shabbat after Shabbat after Shabbat? But it seems to me that the book of Bamidbar is differentiatable from the books of Pרשת, Shemot, and Vayikra, because the book of Bamidbar was actually created by Am Yisrael, and not in a positive way, certainly in a negative way. The story of Shalach, of the fact that Bnei Yisrael wanted and Moshe Rabbeinu agreed to send spies to Eretz Canaan to somehow determine if it was a good deal, if the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was bringing them to Eretz Canaan was something that we could, with our own logical abilities, which we could somehow make it make sense. Make it make sense. We came from Egypt, which was the most well-developed nation at the time, and we were never quite certain whether being in the desert made sense or was an appropriate entree into the world of the land of Canaan. So the fact that Bnei Yisrael sinned, and there was just the history of Bnei Yisrael was a history of sinning. Did they deserve to continue the way to Eretz Yisrael? So we know that after the Chet HaEgel, and that's in the book of Shemot, the Chet HaEgel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to punish Bnei Yisrael by changing the agreement. Whatever the agreement was with Abraham Avinu, which passed down through the generations until Bnei Yisrael were in the desert, that agreement had to be modified. And it was modified, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, it seems to be hopeless. They should be punished severely for what they did. Moshe Rabbeinu argued the case. He was the protector of Am Yisrael. He wasn't just the leader who took them out of Mitzrayim, but he had this special appointment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had given him, and that appointment was the ability to protect Bnei Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu argued the case. HaKadosh Baruch Hu taught him the Yud Gimel Midot of Rachamim, and Moshe Rabbeinu somehow managed to prevent the destruction of the people who he had helped leave Mitzrayim. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, I will accept your plea, but you should know that the idea that Bnei Yisrael have to be punished remains. And that punishment will come in every generation. Whenever the Bnei Yisrael deserve to be punished, they'll be punished a little bit extra, a little bit more for the chet of the Egel HaZahav. So Bnei Yisrael entered into the post Matan Torah phase with this chet, with this difficulty that is upon their souls. They go with this transgression of the Chet HaEgel, following them around wherever they went. So when they sinned with the chet, when the sin came over the chet of the shluchim, of the spies who went to Eretz Israel, it was just obvious that they were going to be punished. That was the promise. The promise was that every time Bnei Israel need to be punished or deserve to be punished, that part of the punishment will be an add-on always for the chet, the egel, the golden calf. So when Bnei Israel sent the spies to Eretz Canaan, when they came back, and Bnei Israel wondered whether they would be able to fulfill the divine promise, and that meant that they were skeptical about the promise, they were punished. And the punishment was that everybody who left everybody who left Egypt would die in the desert. They would die in the desert. And that was something that was the punishment that was taught to Bnei Israel. And then we know de facto, we know that the punishment was another 38 years in the desert, meaning that in all they were in the desert for 40 years. And the book of Bamidbar tells us things that happened to them in the desert. And if I try to remember the things that happened in the desert, so besides the fact that there are mitzvot interspersed, because after all, it's the Torah, and it's Moshe Rabbeinu, and it makes sense that somehow there would be Torah teaching, and we know that the entire Torah was given to Bnei Israel in the desert, taught to Bnei Israel by Moshe Rabbeinu, repeated again and again by those who learned the Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu. But it was also a punishment. It was a punishment. It was a punishment that was unique, because Bnei Israel in the desert, well, they ate the manna, they drank from Miriam's well. They never needed new clothes or to clean themselves up. Everything was perfect. They lived in this perfect world. But within this perfect world, certain things happened which were necessary for the development of the nation that would be able to go to Eretz Canaan, to the land of Canaan, would be able to be the nation that conquers the land in Israel. And so things happened. Things happened, for example, Korach. Korach was a person with political interests. Why this person received a promotion? Why that person? I mean, you know that you could start, the arguments can come and disagreements can be described for no particular reason. That was Korach. But Korach raised an interesting question. He says, Kol Am Kulanu Kedoshim. We were all at Har Sinai. Why do you distinguish one person from the others? We understand that leadership, direction, the person who is able to speak in the sense of Torah, able to kind of tell us what the Torah wants us to do, is always going to be disputed. I mean, we live in the city of, most of us live in the city of Yerushalayim. The city of Yerushalayim is a wonderful example. Anytime there are 10 Jews who want to create a minyan, they disagree with somebody. That's Korach. So Bnei Yisrael had to learn from Korach. What do you do when you're running the show? What do you do when you go to Eretz Yisrael and you conquer parts of it? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that you have to stay away from idolatry. You have to support the notion that God is one. That's what is demanded of us. That's our side of the agreement. That's Korach. The story of Balak, which we'll get back to, the story of Balak is the story of a prophet gone bad. I mean, Bilam was sought out by Balak to curse the people of Israel. Obviously, Balak thought he could do it. He wasn't sort of just trying out different people. He said, Bilam, you can do it. And Bilam, he also thought he could do it. He was willing to take a stand against what HaKadosh Baruch Hu obviously said, because we know that if you don't have the right attitude, you can always twist the words. The truth has become in modern times a precious notion. The truth has no basis anymore. It's not recognizable. So Bilam, the truth of Bilam was prophecy. And we know that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to explain a few things about prophecy, but we know that the religious community, whatever it is, the religious community that conquered Eretz Canaan, that ultimately set up the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, says that group, they've got to be able to distinguish between a person who's speaking the truth, if it's only his truth, and a person who is not interested in the truth at all. And that was the lesson that we were going to learn from Bilam. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent us to battle to understand. We had to understand that when you go to war with divine support, it's different. It's different. That's what Yoshua, according to several Mefarshim, Yoshua, when he fought against the people of Ai, Yoshua, when he fought against the people of Ai, he said, Shemesh v'givon dom, v'yarech v'emakar yalon. Shemesh v'givon dom means, Ribono Shalom, we need a little more daylight. If I had more daylight, I would be able to fulfill this requirement, conquering the city of Ai. And he said it, he said, Shemesh v'givon dom, he commanded the sun to stand still and the moon not to conquer the evening. And it worked. That's called leadership. You do what has to be done. Do it, even if it seems to be unreasonable. It seems to be impossible. So Korach and Bilam, Balak taught us things about the organization of the place to which we are going, so that the punishment that Bnei Israel was subjected to in the 38 years of wandering around in the desert were punishment, because even though the standard of the support that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Am Yisrael was very high, but the punishment was that they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know where they would be. They didn't know how it would be. There was this kind of living in a state of doubt, understanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was with them, but they didn't know what it was that each of them would feel. And for some reason in the Parsha, it also tells us about the fact that that some of them wanted to become part of Eretz Israel on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Reuven, Gad, and then the Chatzi Shevet Menashe were added. Because you could explain it in different ways, but one possibility is that, I mean, look, they had a lot of sheep. And you could say, how come they had a lot of sheep? Why didn't everybody have a lot of sheep? Maybe everybody did have a lot of sheep. But the sheep, the story of the sheep and the fact that they wanted to become part of Eretz Israel on the eastern side of the Jordan River, well, that may be because they just fought a battle. They went to war. When you go to war in those days, there were no refrigerators, so you take sheep with you because you could eat them. I mean, you could slaughter the sheep and then cook them, cook whatever you get from the slaughtering. So maybe somehow those words go together. So that's what I think the book of Bamidbar is. It's the book that might not have been written as a book. I mean, the mitzvot, the halachot, of course, they would all be written. They would be in the book of Dvarim, I suppose. Whatever had to be written in the Torah would be written in the Torah, but the book of Bamidbar is really the book of the 38 or 40 years in the desert. And during that time in the desert, they were punished and they were educated. They were punished, Taita Egel, the sin of the golden calf. They were punished, and they were punished for the sin of the spies that they sent to Eretz Israel, and they kind of were doubtful about the divine position vis-a-vis the conquest. So the book of Devarim has an end. And the end of the book of Devarim, the beginning of the book of Devarim, as the Netziv pointed out in his introduction, we learned that sometime or other. The Netziv pointed out that Am Yisrael is in a certain world at the beginning of Bamidbar, where they're setting up the camp. How will they camp around the Mishkan? And at that time, they were eating the manna, and they were drinking from Miriam's well. And those things, little by little, came to an end in the time that they spent in the desert. And the book of Bamidbar, as a book that talks about the 38 years, of course, didn't have to be written. Because if the Jews had not followed their negative instincts to deny the purposefulness of going to Eretz Canaan, if they had not denied that, they would have gone straight into Eretz Israel, Eretz Canaan. So that's the book of Bamidbar. A few other things in the book which we could think about, but this idea seemed to me that it was important to recognize the fact that there was like a kind of unity to the book of Bamidbar. It makes sense. It teaches us something important to know. On the one hand, you pay for the debts you've created. On the other hand, it teaches us that things can get better. Things can get better even if they start out really in a terrible situation. So in light of all of this, I'd like to learn with you something from the Medrash Tanchuma. which is on the screen right now. Medrash Tanchuma Parshat Matot. The Medrash Tanchuma says Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu. That's a very common in the Medrash Tanchuma. It sort of starts off as a conversation. Kama matanot nibra'u ba'olam. And here, of course, the important word is matanot. There are matanot, presents. A present is something that you get without effort, without actually deserving it. You didn't give up anything. Matanot. Hama matanot nibra'u ba'olam. The Tanchuma says, how many matanot did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create in the world? So obviously, whoever asked the question had a certain idea of what matanot are. We'll get to that. The rule of Kach Shanu Rabotenu. Kach Shanu Rabotenu. This is the answer that we have from our rabbis. Shlosha matanot bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olam. Chachma ugvura ve'osher. Wisdom, power, and riches. Zacha Adam le'echad mehem, a person merits one of these three things. Notel, Emdot, Kol ha'olam, he is one of the appreciated ones in the world. Zacha b'chokhmah, he merited wisdom. Second. Zacha b'chokhmah, zacha b'kol. Chokhmah is everything. Zacha b'gvura, zacha b'kol. Zacha b'osher, zacha b'kol. So if you get one of the three, that's good enough. One of the three is good enough. I just Zacha ba'osher, zacha b'kol. Matai, b'zman she'em matanot shamayim. So when do you say zacha b'kol? That you merited everything. You get everything. Only if b'zman she'en matanot shamayim. They come from heaven. Ubaot mikoach hagvura shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They come from the power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Aval gvurot gvurato v'ashro shel adam. But the power and the riches of a person, eina bloom. Those are things that are nothing at all. Shekein Amar Shlomo. After all, Shlomo HaMelech said in Kohelet, Shivti Raiti Tachat HaShemesh. V'chein Yirmiyahu Amar. Ko Amar Hashem. Al Yitalel Chacham B'chokhmato, etc. In other words, let me just, one more phrase. Matanot elu b'sha'a she'enan min hamakom sofan lipasek mimenu. So he says that there are three matanot. The Tanchuma says there are three matanot, three things that you can get from as a matana, as a gift. What are they? Chokhmah, Gvura, Osher, wisdom, power, riches. Those are the three matanot. But what does he mean? He goes on to explain that those are things that could come from heaven. You don't particularly deserve it. It's a matana. It comes from heaven. It's for you. You don't deserve it. As you get it, that's a matana. But he says it's not true that everybody who is rich received a matana, or everybody who is powerful received a matana. There are people like that who are not good people. And so what he's said is something that's very common in the words of Chazal, and that very common thing in the words of Chazal is that you have to be able to distinguish between divine and regular. What the Tanchuma is talking about is Gvura and Chokhmah and Osher that is engendered by a Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's a matana. But the fact that somebody is rich doesn't mean that he's in that category. He may not be. I mean, so it becomes very difficult to understand. So what the Medrash is telling us in a certain way, that it's very difficult to evaluate how a person is in the eyes of God. I mean, we could think that somebody is a tzaddik or is at least a good person, and then find out at a later date that we were mistaken in our evaluation. And that, of course, is what we see with Bilam as an example, right? There was an evaluation that was made in the world about Bilam, but it turned out that it was mistaken. He was supposed to be a Nabi, but he got to the point where he thought he could determine what heaven should be doing. And that made him a Navi Sheker, because he was promoting an idea that was really Sheker. And now let's look at the Tanchuma again. The Tanchuma says, you see, it's red, the red underline. Shnei Chachamim Amdu Ba'olam. Here is Shanu Chachamim. You see it, the two words before what I started reading. Shanu Chachamim. The Chachamim taught us. Shnei Chachamim Amdu Ba'olam. There were two people in the category of Chachamim. Remember the three categories, right? Chachamim, Gvura, and Osher. There were two people who achieved this Amdu Me'olam. Echad mi-Yisrael, ve'echad mi-umot ha'olam. Wow. And so this is what they say, that these two Chachamim, were, one was from Am Yisrael, and the other one was from Umot HaOlam. Umot HaOlam was a non-Jew, not a Jewish person. Achitofel v'Yisrael. Achitofel gave advice to David HaMelech. Ubil'am me'umot ha'olam. Bil'am me'ana. U'shneihem abdu min ha'olam hazeh. Shneihem abdu min ha'olam hazeh. Both of them were destroyed. Ba'olam hazeh, right? Several times in our parsha, it's mentioned that Bilam was killed in the war against the Midianites. Olam hazeh min ha'olam haba. So following in the kind of the way that the Tanchuma started out, and explained to us that you can't really tell. You can't really tell who is a recipient of the matana and who is contradicting the matana. And so it says, Shanu Chachamim, Shnei Chachamim Amdu Ba'olam, Echad miYisrael ve'echad me'umot ha'olam. In other words, in the entire world, I know about two Chachamim. I guess it means in the personalities. It says Echad, they're called Chachamim. They're understood to be Chachamim. Chachma is one of the three designated matters. Shnei Chachamim Amdu Ba'olam, Echad miYisrael ve'echad me'umot ha'olam. And this is the way it should be. There should be one from Yisrael, Echad l'olam haba. It's not connected to who has the Torah and who doesn't have the Torah. Echad miYisrael ve'echad me'umot ha'olam. Achitofel miYisrael uBilam me'umot ha'olam. U'shneim avdu min ha'olam hazeh. Both of them were canceled out of this world. Me'olam hazeh u'min ha'olam haba. Olam hazeh u'olam haba. So we understand from this Tanchuma that matanot, that the presents that are given to Bnei Yisrael from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, first of all, divide up between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. No, I'm sorry. First of all, they are indiscriminate. Matanot can be matanot for us, for Am Yisrael. It could be matanot for Umot HaOlam. There's no restriction. And it was the idea that Bnei Yisrael were at Har Sinai and they accepted the Torah. That doesn't mean that they are the only ones who might get matanot. As far as we're concerned, that just becomes confusing. Why would there be? Why would be this lack of both of them are punished. They chachamim amdu ba'olam, echad miYisrael, ve'echad me'umot ha'olam. Min Achitofel miYisrael, uBilam me'umot ha'olam. That means there could really be a Bilam. Shnehem avdu min ha'olam. They weren't able to handle the chokhmah that they had received. They went overboard. So when it comes to Bilam actually believed that he could determine what HaKadosh Baruch Hu would do. And Balak, the king, was the one who said, well, everybody knows that. Everybody knows that Bilam could do it. It's just a question if I could pay the price. Shneim avdu mi'olam hazeh. Neither of them, Achitofel or Bilam, especially Bilam, were not able to handle this chokhmah that they had received as a matana. The chokhmah that they received as a matana. So this teaches us, according to the Tanchuma, that it's very difficult to know about people who want to claim a closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What happened to Bilam and happened to Achitofel, who had received the matana of Chokhmah, was that both of them were denied the Olam Hazeh, this world, and Olam Haba, the next world. That's the summary position that I'd like to suggest for Bilam. Even though Bilam remains a mystery, it's not easy to understand. But the Gemara says that it's possible for somebody who's a Navi to become a Navi Sheker, somebody who's a prophet who speaks and takes direction from a Kodesh Baruch Hu, he can become a false prophet. Because prophecy itself is difficult. That's what the Gemara says. The Tanchuma says that Chochmah is difficult. If you feel that you have a certain kind of wisdom, well, it becomes difficult to maintain that feeling and that idea. And again, if I had to, I wanted to add on from the Tanchuma that Bilam came from a world in which there was a parity between Bnei Israel on the one hand and Umot HaOlam, the nations of the world, on the other hand. And it made sense in the idea of the Tanchuma to say that everybody deserves leadership. Everybody deserves spiritual leadership. Everybody might enjoy spiritual leadership, even though at the end it might produce a negative result, even though it starts out as a makana, it will produce a negative result. And people will think of themselves as being able to create or to control the future of Am Yisrael. That's the story of the book of Bamidbar. All the best. Have a good Shabbos. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.